Wait, what if the biggest twist in Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 4, Episode 1, isn't that Captain Pike protected history? What if the episode quietly revealed that he actually created the history we've been watching for nearly 60 years? At first, that sounds impossible, because Star Trek has always taught us that Starfleet officers should preserve the timeline, not shape it. The Temporal Prime Directive exists for exactly that reason. History is supposed to unfold naturally, without interference from people who already know the future. But when you really examine everything that happened in this premiere, that idea begins to fall apart. Pike didn't simply witness one of history's defining moments. He became part of it. In fact, every major event that leads to the birth of humanity's future may now exist because of one decision he made 65 million years in the past. And if that's true, then Strange New Worlds hasn't just told another time travel story. It has quietly rewritten Captain Christopher Pike into one of the single most important figures in the entire Star Trek universe. Before we dive into this theory, do me one quick favor. If a time-traveling Starfleet captain accidentally created your entire civilization, the least you can do is hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, it really helps the channel, and unlike stealing an antimatter fuel cell, it won't accidentally wipe out an entire planet. Also, make sure you stick around until the very end, because I don't think this episode is simply about preserving history. I think it's revealing that Pike was always destined to become one of history's greatest architects, and the clues have been hiding in plain sight. For years, Star Trek has treated time travel as something dangerous, but manageable. Kirk saved the whales, Picard protected First Contact, Janeway repeatedly fought to restore damaged timelines, and even Sisko found himself becoming part of history during humanity's darkest moments. The pattern has always been the same. A Starfleet crew travels into the past, repairs the damage, and leaves history almost exactly as they found it. The goal is preservation, not creation. That's why Strange New Worlds Episode 1 feels so different. Pike doesn't restore history, he becomes responsible for it. That's a massive distinction, because once you realize what actually happens at the end of the episode, you begin to understand that the USS Enterprise wasn't simply caught inside a historical event. It was one of the reasons that event happened in the first place. Everything changes the moment Commander Cassell steals the Enterprise's antimatter fuel cell. On the surface, it looks like another desperate military decision during an ancient interstellar war. Cassell believes destroying the Dahlgren homeworld is the only way to save Mars from extinction. Pike immediately recognizes what that means. If he allows her to continue, an entire civilization will disappear forever. If he stops her, he risks altering history in ways he can't possibly predict. It's one of the most impossible choices Pike has ever faced, because there isn't a perfect answer waiting for him. Every option leads to unimaginable consequences. One path ends with genocide, the other could erase the future itself. Most captains would search for a third solution, but Strange New Worlds deliberately refuses to offer one. Instead, Pike makes a decision based on instinct. He chooses not to interfere. At first glance, that decision feels morally devastating. Pike knowingly allows billions of lives to disappear because he realizes something that nobody else on the bridge has fully accepted. The Dahlgren homeworld doesn't exist in his own century. Every astronomical chart, every Federation record, every piece of history tells him that the fifth planet between Mars and Jupiter is already gone. That realization forces Pike to confront one terrifying possibility. The destruction of the Dahlgren world wasn't an accident waiting to happen. It was always part of history. If he stops Cassell, he isn't saving a civilization. He may be preventing the future that created everyone aboard the Enterprise. That's the moment this episode quietly transforms from a moral dilemma into something much larger. Pike isn't deciding whether history should change. He's discovering that history may have always depended on him making this exact choice. Then the episode delivers its biggest revelation. The destruction of the Dahlgren planet doesn't simply end a war. Its shattered remains become the asteroid belt that has existed between Mars and Jupiter for millions of years. Suddenly, one of the most familiar features of our own solar system receives an entirely new origin story inside Star Trek canon. But the writers don't stop there. One enormous fragment continues traveling through space before eventually crashing into prehistoric Earth. That impact becomes the Chicxulub asteroid, the same catastrophic event responsible for wiping out the dinosaurs. Think about what that means. The extinction that allowed mammals to flourish, the event that ultimately made humanity possible, now exists because Captain Pike chose not to interfere. Without that explosion, the asteroid never reaches Earth. Without the asteroid, the dinosaurs survive. Without their extinction, humanity may never rise to become the dominant species on the planet. The implications are staggering, because the Enterprise crew isn't simply observing history anymore. They're standing at the very beginning of it. That's why I think everyone is asking the wrong question after watching Episode 1. Fans keep debating whether Pike made the correct decision. I think the bigger question is whether Pike ever truly had a choice at all. The episode repeatedly hints that this isn't an ordinary time travel mission. Instead, it behaves like a predestination paradox, one of Star Trek's oldest storytelling devices. In a predestination paradox, the actions taken to preserve history are the very actions that create it in the first place. History doesn't branch into a new timeline. It closes a loop that always existed. Pike believes he's making a difficult moral decision, but what if that decision was already written into history millions of years before he was even born? What if every civilization that eventually emerged, including Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, and the Federation itself, only exists because Pike was always meant to arrive in the Cretaceous period? If that's true, then Strange New Worlds hasn't rewritten Star Trek's timeline at all. It's revealed that Captain Pike has secretly been one of its architects from the very beginning. But I think the consequences of Pike's decision stretch even further than the extinction of the dinosaurs. In fact, I don't think the episode is really about dinosaurs at all. There's simply the first domino. Once that asteroid strikes Earth, an entirely new future becomes possible. Mammals inherited a planet that had been dominated by giant reptiles for more than 150 million years. Evolution takes a completely different path. Primates eventually emerge. Humanity rises. Centuries later, Zefram Cochrane invents warp drive, Vulcans detect Earth's first warp signature, First Contact changes human civilization forever, and the United Federation of Planets is eventually born. Every captain we've ever followed, Kirk, Picard, Sisko, Janeway, Archer, Burnham, and Pike himself, exists because that chain of events was never interrupted. That's why I don't believe Episode 1 is simply rewriting one chapter of Star Trek history. It's quietly revealing that one decision made by Christopher Pike sits at the foundation of the entire franchise. The Federation doesn't just exist because humanity survived. It exists because Pike unknowingly protected the event that made humanity's future possible. That idea also explains something that initially seems strange about Pike's behavior. Throughout the episode, he carries the weight of an impossible moral choice. He knows innocent lives are about to disappear, yet he chooses not to stop it. That's completely against the instincts we've seen from him since Strange New Worlds began. Pike is the captain who always searches for another option. He refuses to accept that sacrifice is inevitable if another path exists. Yet here, he does something that feels almost unthinkable. Why? Because for the first time, he realizes he isn't choosing between right and wrong. He's choosing between the lives in front of him and the lives of trillions who haven't been born yet. That's an unbearable burden for any Starfleet captain. He isn't acting out of indifference. He's accepting that history has placed him in a position where every possible decision comes with unimaginable consequences. That doesn't make the choice easier. It makes it even more tragic. Then there's Mars, and I think this is one of the most fascinating pieces of world building the writers have ever introduced. For decades, Mars has simply existed as the barren red planet that eventually becomes home to Federation shipyards and colonies. We accepted that history because it was always part of Star Trek's future. But Episode 1 completely changes the way we look at it. Mars wasn't always lifeless. It was home to an advanced civilization capable of interstellar travel, advanced weapons, and a desperate war against the Doldrum. More importantly, that civilization wasn't wiped out overnight. Dr. M'Benga discovers that the Martians' DNA contains similarities to numerous species spread throughout the galaxy, suggesting they escaped before their world died and became ancestors to civilizations we already know. Think about how incredible that revelation is. It means the destruction of Mars wasn't the end of its people. It was the beginning of their legacy. The Martians didn't disappear from history. They became part of it, quietly shaping the galaxy long before the Federation ever existed. Once again, Pike isn't simply witnessing history. He's standing at the crossroads where one civilization ends and countless others begin.